in Embroidery Studio e1.5. Toolbars can be undocked and docked in Embroidery Studio e1.5, so you can customize the location of your toolbar and the look and feel to suit the way you like to digitize and the tools that you like to have common on screen. The digitizing tools and editing tools have all been consolidated into new toolbar flyouts. You can access a toolbar flyout by holding your mouse over an icon, and the toolbar flyout will appear with the additional icons and tools available. If you prefer to have all your tools docked independently like they were in a previous release, you can select a toolbar flyout, click on it, and drag it on screen. Once it's undocked, you can select it again and drag it back and dock it into a new toolbar location. Unlike previous releases, I can dock my toolbars in any location within the software, either on the top, the right, the bottom, and of course the left side. This allows flexibility to customize the user interface to a style and layout you prefer to digitize with. Another change to the user interface in Embroidery Studio e1.5 is the introduction of flyout dockers. In previous releases, your object property window, color palette editor, and color object list all docked on the right side of your software. However, they did not auto-hide while you're digitizing, so they took up valuable design space. Now your object properties, your color palette editor, and any docker will dock on the side and will auto-hide when you're digitizing to save valuable digitizing space. If you prefer your docker to stay in place and not auto-hide, you can select on the docker and simply check the auto-hide pin option. This will now lock the docker in its location, and you can expand it and increase its size to the style you want. I can also easily and quickly access additional toolbars in the software by simply right-clicking in an open area, and I now have a list of all the toolbars available in my software. When I select that toolbar will appear, and again I can click and drag it on screen and position it in a location that I prefer. Let's now explore some of the digitizing tools in Wilcom Embroidery Studio e1.5. You can access your digitizing tools in two ways. The first way is to select the icon in the Embroidery Studio toolbox. The second method is to use one of the new Embroidery Studio e1.5 keyboard shortcuts. The keyboard shortcuts in Embroidery e1.5 start from F2 and work through to F12. Each keyboard shortcut has been assigned to a different input tool type or digitizing tool. When I press F2, the system will automatically select Fusion Fill. F3 is Complex Fill. F4 is input A. F5 is input B, and so on. Let's start with one of the line digitizing tools such as Run Stitch. To select Run Stitch, I either again select the icon in the toolbar or use the keyboard shortcut F8. My object property window will automatically fly out and show me the property window for the stitch type or tool that I have selected, in this case Run. When you select a digitizing tool in Wilcom Embroidery Studio, in the bottom left corner of your screen in the prompt bar, you will be provided instructions or steps on how to use that tool. My current instruction says enter point 1 on the Run Stitch curve. Using my left mouse button, I click in the digitizing window. This places my first digitizing point on the Run Stitch curve. To digitize a line, I simply move my mouse to the next location and use either my left click mouse button to create a straight line or my right mouse button to create a curved line. When I'm finished digitizing my line, I simply press Enter on the keyboard and Wilcom Embroidery Studio will generate your object. Some digitizing tools have subtle differences in the way you use them to digitize objects. Let me give you an example by selecting Input C, which is another line digitizing tool that creates a satin column. Again, when I select my tool
in the bottom left corner in the prompt bar, I'm prompted to enter 0.1. On screen I enter 0.1 again using either my left or right mouse button, and I continue digitizing my line. And once again, when I'm finished, I simply press enter. However, in this case, this object has not generated as what previously occurred with my run stitch object. As I can still read in the bottom left corner of my screen in my prompt bar, I'm now prompted to enter the width 0.1. Now input C is a column width object, so at this point it is prompting me to digitize the thickness of my column. So on screen anywhere along my line I enter 0.1 for the first width, and then 0.2 for the second width point, and this now instructs the software the width that I want to create my input C satin column. Let's explore two of the common digitizing tools in Wilcom Embroidery Studio. On screen I have a graphic that contains two very different shapes. The first shape has two sides which are smooth and consistent, and it is a column of varying width. The second shape again has two sides, however one side is smooth while the other side is irregular. Again, this is a turning column shape. Wilcom has two separate tools to help digitize these two very different objects. For the first shape, I'll use the input tool Input A. To select Input A, select the icon on the toolbox, or use the keyboard shortcut F4. Use Input A to digitize columns of varying width and stitch angle. With Input A, you digitize pairs of points that define the object outline and shape, while lines connecting the points define the stitch angles. Let's zoom in closer and digitize this first shape. Once again, following the prompts in my prompt bar, I'm instructed to enter 0.1 on side 1. For my object, I will make the inner curve of this object side 1 and the outer curve of this object side 2. So following my instructions, I digitize 0.1 on side 1, and as per the instructions, I now digitize 0.1 on side 2. As you can see, I've now digitized 2 points and there is a line connecting those 2 points. These points define the outline shape, while the line connecting them defines the stitch angle. Using my right mouse button now, I digitize 0.2 on side 1 and 0.2 on side 2. A right mouse button, as you saw with my line object, creates a curve point. As I digitize along my shape, I am again digitizing the shape outline, while at the same time defining the stitch angles. When I'm finished, I simply press enter and the object will be generated. For the next object, I'll use Input B. To select Input B, again select the tool from the toolbox or use the keyboard shortcut F5. Use Input B tool to digitize shapes where one side is different to the other, especially when one side requires more points than the other. Stitches will turn evenly along the entire shape. Again, I zoom into my object, and once again, prompted by the instructions in my prompt bar, I digitize 0.1 on side 1. However, this time the software has prompted me to digitize 0.2 on side 1 again. Using my right mouse button, I digitize along side 1. Once I'm finished side 1, I press enter, and now the software prompts me to digitize 0.1 on side 2. I return back to the same side I started on my object, and using my left mouse click, I digitize along the irregular shape of side 2. Once I'm finished, I press enter, and the object is digitized. Again, with Input A, your stitches will turn evenly throughout the entire shape, and the stitch angles are calculated from your first digitizing side and your last digitizing side. This next example is a large shape that contains holes. As this object is quite large, I more than likely would need to use a tatami fill instead of a satin stitch. For this type of shape, I will use the Wilcom Complex Fill tool to digitize. Firstly, I select the Complex Fill tool from my toolbar, or again press F3 on the keyboard shortcut. Again, because of the size of this object, I would like to use tatami as my stitch type. From my stitch toolbar where it currently has satin, I select the tatami icon, and now tatami is set as my digitizing stitch type. Use Complex Fill tool to digitize large irregular shapes with a fixed or single stitch angle. By digitizing further boundaries or holes within a shape, you can create filled objects with holes. As instructed in my prompt bar, I enter point 1 on the curve of my object. For complex fill, it's best to start on a sharp corner of your object. Using my left mouse button, I digitize in each corner because this is a straight line. Again, to digitize a curve, I use my right mouse click, and to return to a straight, I use my left. As this is a solid shape, I need to close my curve. With complex fill, I do not need to digitize on my first curve to close. I simply press enter, and the software will close this first boundary for me. The software is now prompting me to enter point 1 on boundary 2. Additional boundaries create holes in your complex fill object. To create a circle hole, I simply use my right mouse click and digitize around the outer boundary of my curve and click enter, and once again the object will close that second boundary. The software is now prompting me to enter point 1 on boundary 3. For this I can create my second hole using my left mouse click, and once again press enter to close that hole or boundary. The software is now prompting me to enter point 1 on boundary 4. Boundary 4 would be an additional hole if I had one. In my case I don't, and so I simply press enter on my keyboard. The software is now prompting me to digitize my stitch angle. First of all, I digitize my stitch angle point 1, and then by moving my mouse I can now see my stitch angle guide on screen. When I'm happy with my stitch angle, I simply click on screen, and the object is now generated with the object outline, the 2 inner boundaries or holes, and the stitch angle that I specified. To create lettering in your Wilcom software, simply select the lettering icon on the toolbar. Lettering can be created in 2 ways. For the first method, simply click on screen with your left mouse button and type the text you want. When you're finished, press enter, and that object's shape will be created. By default, these stitches are not generated in a lettering object. To generate the lettering, press G on your keyboard or press the Generate Stitches icon on your toolbar. The second method to create lettering is to right-click on your lettering tool icon, and in the Object Property window, type your text in the text window. You can create multiple line text by pressing enter and typing your second line. To create your text, press the Create Text icon in the Object Property window. To position that text, click on Screen. Once again, the lettering is not generated by default, so press G on your keyboard or the Generate Stitches icon. Now let's explore how to change the properties of existing objects in your design. To access the properties of any object, select the object, right-click with your mouse button, and select Object Properties. The object property will open and default to the appropriate tab for the object type you have selected. As I have a lettering object selected, it has defaulted to the Special tab and displayed the lettering property options. In this window, I can change any settings such as my font, the height, and also baseline. I can also change other options such as my fill, underlay, pull compensation, and connector settings. To modify these, again select an object and select the appropriate tab in the object property window. With this object, I first of all want to change my input C width to be 3 mm, and I press enter to accept that change. I now want to change my fill type from satin to zigzag. To do this, I either select the fill tab on my object property list and select zigzag as my fill type, or I can select the appropriate stitch type icon on my toolbar. I can also set important options such as underlay. First of all, I'll turn off my true view and zoom in closer to my complex fill object. This complex fill object does not contain any underlay. It only contains cover stitches and some travel runs. To set the underlay, again, I select this object, right-click Object Properties, and by default, again, I'm taken to the Object Type tab, Special, with the object type selected. As I want to change my underlay, I select the Underlay tab, and I now have a choice of setting a first and a second underlay type. For this object, I first want an edge run, so I select First Underlay and change the underlay type to Edge Run. If I like, I can modify any of the edge run settings. For my second underlay, I want a tatami underlay, so I check Second Underlay, and by default my underlay type is set to tatami, but if I want, I can change it to a different underlay type. Reshaping an object is an important part of embroidery digitizing. To reshape the object, select the object and select the reshape icon on the toolbar or the letter H on your keyboard. In reshape mode, you can typically change 3 different things: the object shape, the stitch angles, and the start and end point. Object nodes define the object shapes. Object nodes can be yellow for straight points or blue for curves. Stitch angles are pink, while your start and end point is both green for start and red for end. To change the shape of your object, simply select a node and drag it on screen. When you let go of your mouse, the object will regenerate. Likewise, you can select a stitch angle and drag on screen. I can also change my start point and my end point. Some objects have different reshape methods. Input C is a line tool, so again, when I select the Input C object in my reshape mode, I can drag my nodes to change my object shape, set my object's start and end point. But Input C also has an additional width setting. On screen, I can drag my width line to change the width of the Input C object. Next is complex fill. Again, in the reshape mode, I can change the object shape, the start point, and the end point, and also the stitch angle. While in reshape mode of any object, I can also change the node between a curve and a straight point. To do this, simply select the node and on your keyboard press the spacebar. This will change and toggle the node between straight and curve. Assigning the correct thread color to your design is an important part of embroidery digitizing. This ensures you have the correct color information which will be used at the time of embroidery production. When you digitize a design in Wilcom Embroidery Studio, you may choose to use the Wilcom default thread colors. This default thread color or color palette does not match an actual brand thread chart. These colors do, however, match the color palette available in the CorelDRAW graphics mode. As you can see in my design, I have a lot of colors that I have not used. The colors that I have used have a blue underline. The unused colors take up unnecessary space. To remove these unused colors, select the compact palette icon on your color toolbar. This removes the unused colors from my design. I'm now ready to match the colors in my design to all colors in a thread chart. To do this, I'll use the color palette editor. To access the color palette editor, select the icon in the color toolbar. As I'll be working in the color palette editor for a while, I'll pin this docker in place so it won't auto-close. My first step is to select the thread chart that I use in my business. To do this, select the thread chart option in the color palette editor. From the list, select your thread chart and click OK. This will now display all the colors available in your selected thread chart. In the section below Colorways, I can see each of the colorways and colors in my design. In my case, I only have a single colorway. Again, by default, I've used the standard Wilcom colors. These again do not match an actual thread chart. To match this to a thread chart, select the color, in my case color 1 green. The color will appear on the left side of the available threads. I can manually scroll through my thread chart and visually match up a color. Of course, this can be difficult to do if I have hundreds or thousands of colors. You can force the software to auto-match the colors in your design to colors in a thread chart by selecting the Match column in the Available Threads section. This will auto-sort your thread chart to show the most matching thread color at the very top of the list. By default, this color will be selected. To use this color, simply press Assign. The software will then automatically assign that thread color, in my case C420, which is emerald green from the royal thread chart, and it will auto move to the next color in my design, in my case the default Wilcom yellow. Again, I can simply press Assign and it will use the default color that it has auto selected, in my case C013. Or if I know the color that I have in my collection, I can manually type it in the field available. The software will scroll to that color, and then once again I press Assign. The software will assign that color and auto select the next color on my list, and once again auto match it to the closest available in my thread chart. I can continue assigning each color in my design. A design sewing sequence, including the object sequence and the color sequence, can save you time by consolidating your color movements. In other ways, as much as possible, you only want to sew each color once. This will reduce the number of color changes on your machine. Likewise, the point where your design starts sewing and finishes the sew is also important. It is important because this can help you align your logo to your garment and ensure your machine will not sew into a hoop. First of all, let's inspect the object sewing sequence of this design. To do this, we'll use the color object list. To access the color object list, select the icon on the toolbar or Shift L on your keyboard. As I'll be working in the color object list, I can see the color and object sequence of each element in my design. I can also see what object number it is, the tool used, whether it has been grouped to other objects, and the stitch type, and how many stitches are in that object. My design has red, yellow, black, white, green, white, and grey. In two cases, I have unnecessarily repeated my colors, in both the black and in the white. This will cost me production time and force an additional 2 color changes on my machine. I can consolidate these colors by simply dragging one object up to the next object, and it will now merge my 2 white objects into a single color change. Likewise, I can select my last black object and drag it up to my first black object, and it has again consolidated my two color changes. It's very important, however, that you consider your object sequence. For example, if I drag my white to the very top of my design, it is then sewing first, and I cannot see it because of the other objects. And it is being oversewn by the larger objects following it. So it's important to consider both your object sequence, but also at the same time trying to minimize the amount of color changes on your machine. You can also define where your object will start and finish sewing. To inspect your design sequence, turn off True View and access the Slow Redraw option by selecting the icon on your toolbar or Shift R on the keyboard. Slow Redraw allows you to preview the sewing sequence of your design. You can adjust your machine speed and press play. You can visually on screen watch your design sew. This will allow you to inspect the sequence and also the layout and style of your design. I can also travel through my design using the Travel toolbar. It's important to inspect where the design starts and finishes, and we can do this by using the Start and End travel function. Left-click to return your design to the start point. On screen, I can see by my crosshair that my design is starting here. To travel to the end, I right-click on the Start and End icon, and I can see my design is finishing or ending here. Clearly these do not match, but most important of all, they are not consistent and not in the center of my design. To force my design to start and finish in a center or in any other location, I simply use the Auto Start and End option on my toolbar. To specify the Auto Start and End option, right-click on the icon. In this dialog box, I can choose to auto start in the center, which is a default, or in any pre-configured location. To accept this change, simply press OK. Once again, by going to Slow Redraw and reducing my machine speed, I can see that my design starts in the center, sews out, sews the entire design, and returns to the center again. Wilcom Embroidery Studio e1.5 is an object-based digitizing software. Therefore, all your objects are containing properties that the software file will remember. You can access these properties and change these at any point in time, so long as you save your file as a wilcom.emb file format. To do this, go File, Save As. Ensure that your Save As type is designfiles.emb. Provide a design name and press Save. You can save your design as a stitch format to use on a machine or provide to a customer. To do this, go File, Save As. From the Save As type list, select the machine format you want to use. Press Save. But always remember to save your design as a wilcom.emb file first to ensure you can always return to that design and change any of those properties at a later date.